You can count on my hands how many times in my whole life I've been to Elaine. But I've had relatives here, and I've had relatives that are from here. So it is very pleasing to me to be here today. My name is Linda K. Shelby. And while I was sitting here earlier, I wasn't trying to be presumptuous, and hold court. It's just that they told me that I was going to be on the panel, so I may as well come up here and sit.
Right.
And apparently nobody wants to sit with me. But I'm not complaining. But one lady was talking to me, and it struck me. She said, "But why are you on the panel today?" And I got to thinking, I don't have a law degree. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a famous writer. I'm not someone who has a special case around them. I'm just a community person. I'm a family person.
Okay.
And so I was thinking, why am I on this panel today? I am a heel.
Yeah.
And I am aware.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. All right.
I think that might be reason enough
Yes.
to be included amongst
That's right.
these discussions.
Hey.
And what I would like to talk about is my history. Because my history is your history.
Right.
But even I didn't realize that for a long time. My name is Linda K. Shelby. I feel like I'm a historian. I ended up teaching history in Helena, West Helena at Central High School.
Right.
Where I was one of the ones that integrated before we had total integration.
Right.
So that's another whole story. But I do have some things that happen in my life that makes me understand more what's happening to my Elaine part. Because the most important thing that I can share with you about my Elaine connection is I simply didn't know.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And like I said, I'm a heel and aware on both sides of my family. Elaine is my story.
Right.
Amen.
I was educated in Helena, West Helena, primarily. I was an Army brat until second grade, but that really doesn't count. But I was educated second grade through sixth grade at Westside Elementary School. I was educated from seventh grade to ninth grade at Eliza Miller Junior High School that used to be Eliza Miller High School.
That's right.
But then they changed it.
When it was the black school.
Yes. And when I got to 10th grade, they had a plan that was called freedom of choice. But we didn't get a chance to choose.
Right.
We were chosen.
There you
Right.
go.
They took the top 10%. And they said the top 10%, but there were 36 of us in secondary school at Central Junior and High School. And there was more students than that. Because now some, in order to go back to Miller, your parents had to come up and talk to officials and say, I want my child to go back to Miller. And a lot of parents did, and I kind of understand why they did. But my father, because my mother was crying and having a fit. Not my babies need to go back where they're safe. But my father said, if someone does not do it, if someone doesn't step up,
Right.
it won't be done.
Right.
We will give them an excuse to still take from our kids.
Yes.
Because I remember being in hand-me-down desks
Yes.
that
Yes.
had been duct taped
Yes.
and then brought to Westside School.
Say it. Say it.
Those were the new desks.
There you go.
I remember old raggedy books
Right.
Yep.
that kind of had a back, but it didn't have
Yeah,
a back.
there you go,
You
there
know,
you got it.
and the pieces were missing out.
Yep.
I remember that.
Yeah.
And my father was a community activist, and he said, that's not right.
Right.
You get money for all the school kids.
Yeah.
Why can't our schools get new books?
Yeah.
Why can't our kids have field trips?
Yeah.
We, on our side of town, we didn't have field trips. You know, well, I remember us getting, being allowed as a group to walk over to Second Baptist Church, which was a block and a half from the school, and we walked because someone who had gone to Africa had, wanted to talk to us and show us things. And that was our field trip.
Yeah.
I guess it was literally a field trip because we walked. We didn't get a bus. The safety patrol, had the little signs and stuff, and like I said, it's about a block and a half. So my father said, if we don't do it, if we don't allow it, then it will never, come to pass. So I ended up graduating from Central High School in the last class of Central High Indians and Eliza Miller Buccaneers.
All right then.
And I claimed both classes. I went to both class reunions.
Right.
But they should have been one.
Yeah.
A long time before. The reason I point out my education, because especially in elementary school and junior high school, I was taught, I had some African American teachers who were wonderful. They were really smart. I had a math teacher who, we had some, different problems in math, but my dad would come up to the school and present problems every Friday. And they were always algebraic problems, trigonometry problems, way out of our universe. But my math teacher would help us work on them so that when Mr. Shelby came in, of course now, my dad told me, and I didn't tell them, the $5 the $5 prize that he was offering was my allowance. If I wanted allowance, I better win figuring out that problem. And I was accused of your daddy told you. I said, no, it's just, I gotta have my father. But those same teachers had, I don't know if you remember, Federated Club,
Yeah.
4-H Club, and those were my same, adults who sponsored those things. And in those clubs, they told us about Marian Anderson and about Paul Robeson and about, national black people who we should be proud of. They told us things, like I said, national black people that we should be proud of. But nobody told us about Elaine.
Right. Right.
And I just wonder if they knew. I knew that they didn't tell us. They told us a little bit about Helena African American history because Centennial Baptist Churches
Right.
and the National Baptist Convention and
E.C. Morris.
E.C. Morris, my mind was blank, but E.C. Morris was important in that as well as Centennial Baptist Church. So I did get a little bit of local history, but not really. When I say not really, it was the National Baptist Convention angle that was,
Right. Right.
And so I knew that all black folks were not just country, lazy people or workers and unintelligent people who had no education. But they did not tell me about me, my family. You know, Phillips County being really significant.
Right.
You know, they did not tell me about Elaine. My grandmother was Gertrude Ware Hill,
Where?
and she was my North Star. I was her oldest grandbaby, and I'm not saying I was spoiled. I was not spoiled. I just had a lot of attention until the rest of them folk. And she taught me how to cook things. She told me stories about when she was little. And it was a little confusing because she lived on a farm, a nice big farm on Coffee Creek. And her father farmed, and he farmed a lot of acreage. And she remembered, she was the baby of a family of 4. And she remembered getting all dressed up and riding to church in a carriage that was pulled by matching bays. So I kind of got the impression that we wasn't that far poor.
That's right.
Right.
You know, we might not have been rich, but we had a little bit of handkerchief to wave in there.
There you go.
And she was born in 1909.
All right.
And by the time she was 5th grade, you know, because they had a little schoolhouse out there. She wasn't in the schoolhouse anymore. She was going to school in St. Louis.
Excuse me.
Now, what she described was a childhood that was wonderful. You know, the family was respected. They went to church every Sunday. And then they were in St. Louis, and she was going to school there, where she wasn't exactly special. And her father was an elevator operator.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he missed farming.
Yeah.
And after she completed school, which was 8th grade at that time, somewhere after that, they went back. Well, first they went to the Missouri Boot Hill because we had cousins there, and he farmed a little bit, but his heart was to come back to Phillips County.
Right.
And they came back to Phillips County, and he leased some land, but it wasn't the same.
No.
They did not have carriage
Right.
with the babies. They went to church, but sometimes, you know, somebody in the wagon had to pick them up or something. It just was a totally different kind of existence. And it didn't make sense to me, but I didn't know the questions to ask. She was courted by a young man from Coffee Creek whose father was a minister, and he had taught at Southland College. And they had a farm, but basically my granddaddy and his brothers did the work on the farm because Grandpapa just wasn't, you know, was not much of a farmer. That's probably why he was teaching over at Southland College. But, you know, they had a pretty good life. But by the time my grandfather proposed to my grandmother, they had lost their farm. So they got married, and decided to move up to Helena, West Helena, and work in the mill, which was a big jump from their childhood and now their young adulthood. But I didn't know what questions to ask because it really didn't make any sense.
Right.
And I was fully grown, and I did a lot of community work. And I got an opportunity to go to, and I still can't remember the name of that center, but it's in Tennessee, up in the Smoky Mountains, where they took Highlander, that's
There you
it,
go. There you go.
where they trained
Active.
activists. And while I was up there, somebody walked up to me and said, "Oh, you're from Arkansas. What part of Arkansas are you from?" I said, "The Delta." And they said, "Well, you're probably kind of familiar. You may not live too, you may not be that close. But the Elaine riots."
Yeah, yeah.
And I was like, huh? I have no idea what you're talking about. So Highlander has this big library, and it has all of these old newspaper articles. I mean, the library, half the library is old newspaper articles and stuff. And so they took great joy in taking me in there and pulling out old Memphis commercial appeals. I mean, not made up stuff, old Arkansas Gazettes,
Yep.
old Tri-State Defenders,
Yeah.
and Daisy Bates
Right.
paper, the old copies of that, where it talked about this massacre in Elaine.
Yeah.
And it started calling names, and I was like, I know these names.
Yeah.
Because one thing about my grandmother, she told me the family names, because that's important in my family. You need to know the family name.
Right.
And in our family names are repeated. And I got to reading, and I recognized names, but these people could not be the people that I knew, the cousins that I knew. And then I remember, we repeat names in my family.
Yeah.
So I couldn't wait to get home and talk to my grandmother, because surely she knew all about this. Because my grandmama was the smartest person in the world. Anything I wanted to know, I wouldn't ask my grandma. How to make $1 million? I go ask my grandmama, and she give me an answer. I asked my grandmother, and she said, weren't we supposed to do something this afternoon? And I was like, well, and I said, okay, well, then, she distracted me. And so I asked her again later on, and she said, what are you talking about? I said, the 1919 Elaine riots. And she said, in 1919, I was 10 years old. Okay. I kept pushing her, but she was giving up nothing. And then she was asked to be interviewed. She was one of the volunteers during Black History Months at the local library, Helena Library, where she would go and she would regale, I said the children, but adults pulled up. She could just tell you Brer Rabbit stories, the little hen, she knew all of these stuff, and no book. She recited poems, and they got to a place where they didn't wait till Black History Month. They tried to have a storytelling month every month, and they would invite her, And so when the name just escaped me. The guy who did the Persistence of the Spirit display for Arkansas Heritage, and they take it around to the different centers. He was in Helena, and they had, the library had recommended that he talk to her. And she was in her 80s then. And so, he did reach her on the phone, and she said, I don't do anything without my grandbaby. So, we made an appointment so I could be there with her. And unlike other people who had tried to interview my grandmother, number one, he didn't say anything about the Elaine lights. He just talked about or asked her questions like, where did you grow up? Where did you go to school? How did you move around? Tell me about your daddy, your mother. I understand you were the baby of the family because her oldest brother and her oldest sister stayed in St. Louis. And when the family returned, the baby boy and my grandmother came back. But again, it was a different life. And they even thought about going back, but my great-grandfather just refused to go back. But it was a totally different life. And like I said, this guy was a genius because he didn't say, tell me about the Elaine riots. Why won't you talk about it? He just asked different questions about it. Well, didn't you have people in your family named, they lived in Coffee Creek, they lived in Elaine? I mean, what's going on, do you remember anything about them? And all of a sudden, it was like, maybe it's time. Understand, she was 10 years old in 1919. But she was brilliant, and she listened to grown people. You know how you don't listen to grown people, you behind over here and stuff. My grandmama was the smartest person in the world, and she didn't talk a lot, but she heard a lot. And she began to tell him, because he did finally say, well, why didn't you tell these kind of things? Isn't it time to speak up? And she said, we had family members who disappeared.
Yeah.
And some of them, when I was full grown, I heard from again. And some of them I didn't. And some of them left, and their name was Robert. And then when I met them again in Chicago, their name was something else, Cecil. And the one thing that I did know that was really important was that if anybody, especially anybody white, asked you about any of these people who were gone, don't tell them anything.
Right.
Their life depends on it. And they told that to a 10-year-old girl who was 85 years old. And she was still keeping the family alive.
Yeah.
My grandfather almost got beat because I asked him about it. I asked Grandpapa about it, Aaron Hill. And he was like, oh, girl, I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you want some more of this candy? And my granddaddy Hiram said, don't talk about that. And I said, okay. And I asked him again later on. He said, you ask me about that again, and I'm going to beat you. And I was crushed because my grandfather just adored me. I got away with stuff that my young aunt couldn't get away with. But he was serious because they were keeping the family alive.
Right.
You just don't talk about it. And if you get a message that someone in the family, but maybe not a name, needs your help or needs to get a message to somebody, they did. But you just didn't talk about it. When the guy from Persistence of the Spirit talked to my grandmother, and I guess she got comfortable, and he kept pointing out the fact that, it had been 75 years ago. I learned more about my family than I had all my life. From a woman who taught me how to cook and manners and how to sit up straight and how to pronounce words and, but she did not tell me about Elaine.
Yeah.
Now, the one thing she did tell me after the guy left was it wasn't a riot. She said he was calling it Elaine riots, but it was not a riot. It was a massacre. And people died. And people escaped, and they may as well have died.
Yeah.
Because their families never heard from them again. And people who stayed still lost everything. And they were trying, there were people who stayed who tried to do the right thing. Do the right thing, do what they were told and stuff. But they suffered too. At 85, was still protecting her family. That is where the Elaine riots touched me the most. Because like I said, my grandmother was my North Star. And she told me everything. And the one thing she did not tell me was about Elaine. This is my heritage, just like it's your heritage. And we need to make sure that it's reformulated, it is reshaped, so that it becomes a positive part of our heritage, our history. And part of the positive part is 10-year-olds protected the family.
Yeah.
Amen.
And I'm not 10 anymore,
There you go.
but it's my job to keep protecting the family and do what we can do to make things right.
Mm.
I thank you for allowing me to share in this occasion with you.
We thank you.
Member Shelby.